Hello, and welcome to our last video in the series of 4 videos designed to help people who are studying for the membership quiz to join the National Association of Parliamentarians. These videos have been produced by the International Services Committee of the National Association of Parliamentarians, and the quiz that we're preparing you for will be based on Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, and the third edition, in fact, of that book, so which you see depicted there on this screen. And if you have heard this over again and again, then I apologize, but I think a couple things just should be made clear in any event. So here we are in our 4th video. Again, in addition, by now, hopefully you have downloaded the NAP membership study guide, which you also see depicted there, which can be downloaded for free at the website of the National Association of Parliamentarians. You see the URL there. Parliamentarians.org is the website, and you'll easily locate the area that talks about joining and the application information. And from there, again, you should have no trouble getting the study guide if you have not already done so. So hopefully you've been doing these things in order, so we should be just about ready to get into today's material, which is the last of our videos. Repeating, my name is Dr. William J. Puett. I am a parliamentarian, and in fact a professional registered parliamentarian by the National Association of Parliamentarians, and a certified parliamentarian by the American Institute of Parliamentarians. And I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. If you need to contact me or have any questions about the application process that you aren't able to find answers anywhere locally by where you may live, you can drop me an email at the email listed there, info@hsap.org. So, course overview. Here we are on our 4th video, and as you can see, we're going to be talking about elections, nomination and elections, and basic types of rules of an organization, and the relationship to each other, and then, of course, enforcement and suspension of rules. So we will be looking at your 3rd edition of RONRIB, or Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, which in the pages will be starting at page 77, which is where our chapter 9 will begin. And today in this session, I should say, we should finish off those 3 chapters, so that by the time we're done with this, you should be ready, prepared, I should hope, hopefully, to take the membership exam. So our first topic is nominations and elections in chapter 9. So as I said, page 77 is where that should start. So if you have your books with you, you might want to open them up as we take on that first topic. And it's a pretty short little chapter, but it's very, it's got a lot of materials, full of very important materials. Chapter 9. Terms we're going to define here are, what's the difference between nomination and election? What do these words mean? So as you can see, they're explained on page 78. A nomination is a formal proposal to fill an office or position, suggesting a particular person as the one who should be elected. All right. So when we look at nominations, people can nominate more than one person, and so that when you have an election, you could be voting for more than one person. Right? And then the election, by the simple definition of an election, is the vote, which will be then taken to determine the person to serve in a specified position, usually from among those nominated. The 2 most common means of making nominations are nominations from the floor and nominations by a nominating committee. So nominations from the floor, you see illustrated there. I nominate Mrs. A, or obviously her real last name. And the other possibility is by using a nominating committee. Well, let's look at them. All right, first of all, nominations from the floor. Nominations are called for in the order of offices listed in the bylaws. So this is going to be most likely the case in some of the smaller organizations where there's no attempt to get nominees in advance uh, and set a specific ballot, for instance, which may happen in again in a larger organization. But nominations from the floor is the simplest form, and as we say, it's easy enough for anybody to make a nomination. The chair says nominations are now in order for the office of. So if you're electing a set of officers, you do the nominations one at a time. And as soon as the chair presents that by saying that they're in order, then anybody may call out, I nominate, and whoever that they want to nominate, right? So the nomination, you don't have to be recognized to make a nomination, and a nomination does not require a second. Right? So unless your bylaws have some specific rule, there are a couple of organizations or societies I know that because they want to do their nominations in advance, so that they can have their election ballot all prepared at the meeting in which the election will take place. And then they may have an additional rule that says that to limit the number of nominations, that it requires maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people to fill out and nominate somebody. But that would be a bylaw requirement. Roberts does not require that at all. Right? The chair repeats each nomination and asks for further nominations for that office. Right? So again, you're looking at the language. Mr. X is nominated, and then are there any further nominations? And you keep going until you don't hear any more people trying to make a nomination. And then finally, if the chair says, are there any further nominations? And there's no response. If not, nominations for the office of, let's say, president are closed. Right. And that first point, again, is maybe I didn't emphasize enough. Nominations are called for in the order of offices listed in the bylaws. So which do you elect first? Do you go for the vice president and then the treasurer and then the president and then the second? No, you look what your bylaws say and you go in order according to the way they're listed in the bylaws. But the other way that nominations can happen, actually it's a combination, is by a nominating committee. And so some organizations have provision for nominating committees in their bylaws. When a nominating committee is to be used in an organized society, the members of the committee should be elected, not appointed. All right. Their task will be to make nominations, and they could nominate more than one person. The committee may nominate one, or less commonly, more than one candidate for each office. And they should secure each nominee's consent to serve before doing so. This is not an absolute requirement in particularly, for instance, let's go back to nominations from the floor. What if you want to nominate somebody who is not there? You just think they'd be a good candidate. Roberts does not require that you get their permission in advance. Your bylaws or other rules may require so, but that means that if they get elected, then they have the opportunity when they're notified of their election to decline. And if they do, then the position is still vacant and the election is incomplete. So it's best to save yourself that trouble for the organization. So you notice here it says should, not must, okay? That you should secure each nominee's consent to serve before doing so. The nominating committee may report at the meeting at which the election is to be held or at a previous meeting, whichever procedure has been established by rule or custom. At that meeting, the chairman of the committee should report, Mr. President, the nominating committee submits the following nominations: for president, Mr. A; for vice president, Mr. B, etc., down the line. Right? But after all of the nominations have been given by the nominating committee, unless there is a prohibition in your bylaws, then you now, the chair should now ask for further nominations from the floor. So that's what Roberts provides. That's an important thing to do. It's not just the people who've been nominated by the nominating committee. According to Roberts, the chair must then call for further nominations from the floor. So in the election process, a couple of important things to know. If there is only one candidate and the organization's bylaws require a ballot vote for an election, a ballot vote must be conducted. And this was something we went through in a previous video. Once the bylaws have a requirement, that cannot be suspended. So if your bylaws require that, even though you have even only one person nominated, you'd still have to go through a ballot election. Unless your bylaws had a provision that in the event that there is only one nominee or one person nominated, then the ballot vote will not be necessary. And if that's the case, then the candidate can be declared elected by acclamation. So again, if only one candidate is nominated and the bylaws do not require a ballot vote, the chair declares the nominee elected by acclamation. On any ballot vote, write-in votes may be cast. So in ballot voting, and you know, it's not the only way to elect. Ballot is just one method, but ballot voting in particular, write-in votes may be cast for any eligible person. They're not limited to the people who have been nominated. So even if a person has not been nominated, then anybody who is filling out a ballot vote can write in the name of somebody, so long as they're an eligible person. So if you write in to be funny, you know, Mickey Mouse or Daffy Duck or something, that would not count, because that is it's not an eligible member of the society. Or if you nominate somebody who hasn't met the requirements for office that may be in the bylaws, that would also not be possible. But you're not restricted to the people who have been nominated unless your bylaws make that restriction. If no candidate gets a majority, again, we're talking about the idea of a plurality. Remember, Robert says you can't elect somebody with a plurality vote. So if you have more than, if you have 3 or more people running for a given office and no candidate gets a majority, balloting continues, retaining all the candidates as candidates, all of those who did not voluntarily withdraw. So Robert's solution is just to keep doing the election over and over again, something like what we see when a new pope is elected, I suppose. So until finally somebody gets elected. Now that may be impractical for some organizations, so that's why they may resort to some other form, for instance, plurality or preferential voting. But that would all have to be provided in your bylaws, or a rule, a special rule of order passed that it was adopted prior to the meeting. Election becomes final when the chair announces the result if the candidate is present and does not decline, or is absent but has previously consented to serve. All right. So that's again why it's such a good idea to make sure that if you're going to nominate somebody, that they have agreed to serve. Save yourself having to do the election over again or continue the election in some other means, because it's not final until the chair announces the vote, the result, and the candidate is either present and does not decline or has given the consent in advance. Important point. If the one elected declines, balloting continues until someone willing to accept receives a majority. If there is no different provision in the bylaws, a candidate takes office as soon as his or her election becomes final. All right. So some organizations often prefer to provide for the new officers to assume office at the close of the meeting at which they are elected, or at some later time. And if they do, then that really should be in the bylaws. Right? Otherwise, as soon as the election is final, which could be in the middle of the meeting or sometime at the beginning of the meeting, then that's the way it is, and those officers assume their positions. The new officers assume their office at that time period, which may mean passing the gavel right in the middle of the meeting to the person who just got elected so they can continue the meeting. I like to point this out. It's not test material, so you don't have to worry about it. But in the big book, as we've been calling it at earlier places, in other words, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, the 12th edition, about which this in brief book is giving you the basics. But in that 12th edition of Roberts, there are a number of really useful things in the appendixes, and so in what they call the tinted pages also. So in the back of that of the 12th edition, as it was in the back of the 11th edition, there is this really good table of how to help the people who are counting the ballots figure out what's a valid vote and what's not a valid vote. So you see there, it gives you a quick way to answer questions that may come about, is this vote to be credited to a candidate, or is this counted towards the number of votes cast? And because those rules can get a little complicated, I always make copies of this and take it with me whenever there's going to be an election meeting. And the tellers are going to be counting ballots so that they can quickly get the answers to these questions. So just FYI, that's in the back of the 12th edition now, and it's in the tinted pages. So the tinted pages at the end have their own numbering system. It's T52. Okay. So next topic is the ranking rules, or the rules governing an assembly. And so at this point, hopefully you'll be on page 84, I think, yes. So, and actually, when I'm teaching a class on parliamentary procedure, I always begin with this section instead of, so it's a little awkward for me to have this near the end of the sequence, because so many times people who get lost or get stuck on a problem in their meetings, the problem might relate to some conflict between rules of the organization, one from another. So what do we do if the bylaws say this, but we have a rule of order, or if the corporate charter says this, or if there's a law that says that? So, so this is really a very handy thing to know and understand, and I'm glad they have this provided for it. Here it is in chapter 10. The rules governing an assembly from the highest to the lowest. So this is the hierarchy, and that's why I say they're the ranking order of these different rules. And as you can see, law is at the top. If you're in a meeting of a society that is governed by a state or federal law, and it can happen, you might be a nonprofit, that there's a Nonprofit Act that you have to follow, or a lot of the unions have to be careful because they're subject to laws relating to the organization of unions, or a number of different things that could come to play. Law is going to be the highest authority, so it will supersede. In a conflict, it will prevail if it is in conflict with any of the other things that you see on this list. So after that, we start to get into the rules that were developed by the organization. And the top of them is corporate charter. You may or may not have a corporate charter. That's for incorporated groups. So if your society is incorporated and it becomes like a nonprofit, it may also, in addition to being subject to the local state nonprofit act, it could be that you'd have provisions in your charter that would be important to understand and follow. Or you might be an affiliate of an organization that has a charter. So understanding these higher rules can be very important. And if you're going to be a president, or if you're going to be a parliamentarian, you should always have copies of all of these applicable rules and study them before you go into the meeting, right? Most commonly, though, we're talking about the bylaws. And so often we have seen through this series, and you'll see it throughout the 12th edition of RONR, as well as this third edition of RONRIB, reference to the bylaws. The bylaws, they'll say, sometimes they'll say, well, Robert says this if the bylaws are silent. And that tells you right off the bat that the bylaws are going to have a higher authority than Robert's Rules of Order, right? And the bylaws, or it could be called a constitution. And in some groups, you may have both a constitution and a bylaws. Roberts basically provides, and throughout all of the rules of order, the term bylaws is used, but that encompasses a constitution if you have a constitution. So you can presume that whatever it says about bylaws is going to apply to the Constitution as well. Roberts also doesn't suggest that you only have bylaws, and the only purpose for having a constitution would, in addition to bylaws, is if your constitution was harder to amend, but that's a different area we'll get not important for this particular quiz that you're going to be taking shortly. The important thing to understand is its order, right? And in fact, you may be given a situation where these are all jumbled up and you have to organize them properly, so be prepared for that. And you can see that in the practice questions that are in that study guide, right? Be able to reorganize these into the order that you see here if they are presented to you in some other order. Okay, so Constitution or bylaws are the basic rules relating principally to itself as an organization, as the way they define that, as you can see. So the good news is these things are in fact basically defined, and in particular the bylaws or constitution is explained in some detail there on page 85. So you might want to have a look at that. What do they usually do? They describe the group's purpose. They spell out the qualifications and method of selection of members. They provide for officers, who are going to be your officers, and for committees, particularly standing committees, and sometimes the whole, and of course, quorum. We mentioned that as well earlier. So there's a lot of very important things that will commonly be in the bylaws or the Constitution. So they are going to be very important to understand, because whatever default rules we have in Roberts, these will supersede them. So after the bylaws and Constitution, the next in order are rules of order. So as you see, these are the written rules of parliamentary procedure that are generally composed by the organization. They, unlike the bylaws or Constitution, they can be suspended possibly at a meeting with the 2/3 vote. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So there are two different types of rules of order. One is the special rules of order, and they have authority in that order. They outrank, right, and supersede your parliamentary authority. What is the parliamentary authority? That would be usually something like Robert's Rules of Order, and there are different parliamentary authorities, but is over 90%, I believe, it is calculated at one point, of organizations that identify or specify a parliamentary authority in their bylaws, which is a good idea. They specify Robert's Rules of Order, current edition. So, and that would mean now the 12th edition. Okay. So if you want to have something that's different from what's in your parliamentary authority, but it's not in your bylaws, you could adopt a special rule of order to cover that. And then the last two down here are standing rules, which tend to be administrative in detail. Now, sometimes you'll hear the term standing rules used in conventions, and there'll be a combination of what we would identify as special rules of order and administrative details. For instance, that you might have to go to the microphone to be recognized. That would be more administrative detail. But how long you speak, that would be a procedural rule, and Roberts already provides, right, that 10 minutes is how long you may speak. But so if you don't like that, then you could pass a special rule of order. But the difference is, to adopt a special rule of order that's in conflict with your parliamentary authority requires a 2/3 vote. Whereas a standing rule, administrative only, right, can be adopted with a majority vote. And finally, we have this topic of custom. And so again, looking at the definition of this under number 6 on page 87, you'll see that this quite frequently, there'll just be ways of doing things that you never bothered to put into a rule or into your bylaws. And they have a place, they should be adhered to, but keep in mind, they're at the bottom of the authority list here, which means that if they come into conflict with any of the written rules above it, standing rules, parliamentary authority, special rules of order, bylaws, corporate charter, or the law, then the custom, they say, falls to the ground and should not be adhered to in any way, shape, or form. One of the things I also like is that they have on page 88 is that it is a good policy. It doesn't say it's a requirement, but it's a good policy for every member to be given a booklet with the group's corporate charter, bylaws, special rules of order, and standing rules. It is desirable to be familiar with these in order to participate fully in the group. And if you're a parliamentarian, it's a particularly credentialed parliamentarian, it is an expectation and a professional duty. Okay, just to go quickly through those, again, maybe a little bit more detail. The law supersedes any conflicting provision in the organization's rules. So these are just a quick bullet list here of some typical types of things that will come into play. And certainly in my practice, I've seen these things. So if you're dealing with a labor organization, then there's a federal law called the Landrum-Griffin Act or the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. And it has provisions in there that are in conflict with Roberts, how long a term it can be, and so forth, and how elections are to be conducted, so how nominations are to be conducted. So if you're dealing with an organization that's covered by that law, you need to know what those provisions are, or you should seek the advice of an attorney. Then sometimes you will be dealing with a group like a neighborhood board or whatever that is covered by your local sunshine law, they call that, right? An open meeting law, and that may have provisions that are different from what's in your bylaws or that are different from what's in Robert's rules, and they will supersede. So there's also very commonly a state will have a nonprofit corporation law or a nonprofit act, and that will provide for how meetings are to be conducted and how officers are to be elected, etc. So again, you need to ask when somebody asks you to be a parliamentarian a lot of questions, and particularly, are they governed by any of these types of statutes? In which case, you need to find out about them. Then, or if you're in a member of one of those organizations, then it's a good idea to educate yourself on the provisions of the laws that you need to follow. Planned community and homeowner associations or condominiums now are often subject to special state laws, and so you should, if you're helping a group, or if you're a member of a group, if you own a condo, then that law may have differences between the stipulations of that law and other things that are in your other rules, such as your bylaws or your special rules of order or your parliamentary authority, or even custom. So these are the highest law, and all of these could end up being encompassed by that word law. That is going to be the highest authority. Okay. The corporate charter, as I said before, if and only if an organization is incorporated. The law of the state under which it is incorporated generally requires it to have a corporate charter, which means that you have to make sure that you're in conformance with that, and nothing you do at the meeting can violate your charter. What this must contain, sometimes a charter will have very little information other than the name of the organization. But there are some charters that contain a lot more. So you have to look at what the state requires and what's in the charter. So, Constitution and bylaws, as I said before, you could have both the Constitution and a bylaws if you're an affiliate of a larger organization. You see, then you need to know what are the requirements that are in each of these, not just one or the other. So bear that in mind. And I like to sort of throw in one little thing that you should also be aware of, and that is that sometimes people call their major document something other than bylaws or constitution. And I've worked for a couple of these organizations, and you'll notice that they don't call their bylaws bylaws. They call them these other things. So the family fraternity, the Moose, will refer to their bylaws. They call them general laws. Okay, so their general laws are actually their constitution and bylaws. Same thing with the International Organization of Oddfellows. They have a code of general laws. That is, in essence, whatever Roberts talks about what's in the bylaws, you're talking about that. The Masonic Code is another one, right? So whatever name is used is not as important as what it is. And so, and the same thing with some of these offices. So instead of a president, they might have, the Grand Moose or something. And so, but if you look at what their what duties they're describing in their general laws, then you can determine that the general laws are really bylaws, and the Grand Moose is actually the president. So, okay. So bylaws are the highest level of rules contained in a document of the organization. So this is, again, the material that's there on page 85, I believe. So the bylaws often contain these kinds of things: describe the group's purpose, spell out the qualifications and methods of selecting members, provide for who the officers, committees, and meetings are going to be, and include quorum very commonly. But again, if the bylaws are silent, we said, the quorum is a majority of the members. Otherwise, it should be provided in the bylaws. And they may set up an executive board or a board of directors, and then whatever authority the executive board or board of directors has will be spelled out in the bylaws. Bylaws should include provisions for their own amendment that require previous notice of proposed amendments and at least a 2/3 vote for them to be adopted. Drafting and adopting bylaws is an essential step in forming a new organization. There's an entire chapter or two in the major book, Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised, that go into how to form an organization, and it even has sample bylaws, and the whole process is necessary to start from nothing, go to a mass meeting, and then to get your committees to author bylaws. So you should consult Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised 12th edition and those sections 56 and 57 if you are need to consult about that yourself, or if you're trying to form an organization. The activity of an organization must be conducted in compliance with its bylaws, and the main motion that violates them is not in order. That's a very important preliminary concept of what motions are in order and what motions are not in order, right? A motion that is in some way or another going to violate what is already provided for in those higher authorities, and particularly your bylaws, is not in order. Before, I think we have said at least once or twice that you cannot suspend the bylaws. When I took my first course in parliamentary procedure, there was this, the parliamentarian who was doing that course is now long gone, sadly, gave me this chart, and I've always remembered it, written it down, and passed it on to anybody when I'm teaching. You may not deviate, ignore, violate, evade, or suspend the bylaws. All right. So keep that in mind. And I have an asterisk because there is an exception to suspending the bylaws. It's rules that are in the nature of rules of order. And you can see that in the 12th edition in section 2, paragraph 8. There's a list of a couple of things. But the most common example of that is it may provide in your bylaws that the president is going to be the chair or presiding officer of all meetings. That can be suspended by a 2/3 vote to provide for someone else to be the parliamentarian, for instance, somebody else to be the presiding officer at a meeting. So that is possible, or by unanimous consent. And not infrequently, parliamentarians are asked to preside, but they'll have to make sure that they do it properly by making sure that they handle this, and it's handled before they take the chair as the presiding officer, uh, and that they have been, that rule has been suspended properly. But that's pretty much, almost anything else is not going to be something you can suspend easily. Like we said before, if your bylaws require a ballot vote, that is not something that can be suspended. When a group needs to vary the rules from those in the parliamentary authority, it may adopt special rules of order. So again, the parliamentary authority is special rules of order altogether. But you may not want to follow everything that's in Roberts, but you don't want to put those things in your bylaws. So then you can adopt special rules of order that will supersede the parliamentary authority or Roberts rules. To adopt or amend special rules of order requires previous notice. We talked about previous notice in the previous video. So, and a 2/3 vote, right? Or else, with or without previous notice, a vote of the entirety of the membership of the entire membership of the voting body, right? So to give you an idea of, well, what do you mean? What kind of special rules would an organization want that would be different from Roberts? Well, here's an example of 3, right? The most common special rule of order that any organization I've ever worked for is going to adopt as a special rule is the one about the length of debate, length of speeches and debates. So as we remember from the previous video, Roberts provides that somebody in debate may speak for 10 minutes 2 times, right? Well, that 10 minutes is, in today's world, often considered over the top. And that means 20 minutes. Everybody gets to talk 20 minutes on every motion. Whew, you're rather hoping the meeting is not going to go that long, I suppose, in today's world. And so most organizations will adopt a special rule that sets a different limit, much less than 10 minutes. Could be 2 minutes, could be 3 minutes, whatever, right? So that is one of the most common uses, and it's a good idea to do that if you have a problem with meetings going on, or 1 or 2 people who tend to monopolize all the debate, and you for some reason you can't stop them. So whatever, that's a good rule then that would control that a lot better, right? You'd still leave the 2 times, but each time should be only 2 or 3 minutes is most common in the groups that I see. And then the other one now, because we have teleconferences, and it's possible to have teleconferences, to have and teleconferences, by the way, electronic meetings have to be authorized in the bylaws, according to Roberts. And further, you need rules to make sure that your teleconference is being properly fair to everybody in the meeting, because when you conduct it by teleconference, for instance, doing a voice vote can really not work out very well, even though that would be the default way to do it in a regular meeting. So this is a common rule for most groups I know that do teleconferences or even video conferences. And that is that motions not adopted by unanimous consent shall be voted on by roll call. All right. And then, because they don't want to have everybody's name and vote recorded in the minutes, again, that could be made a special rule of order. And you do it right in that place here. And then you wouldn't have to write everyone's vote down, right? Names and votes not recorded in the minutes. And the third really common example, you remember that when we talked a little bit about minutes earlier, one of the things that we said was that it can be a reading and approval, right? And if they are pre-circulated, then there is no requirement to actually read the minutes unless one member insists. That was something I went through before. Now, you could make a special rule then to stop that from happening. Minutes distributed in advance by post or email to all members will not be read at the meeting prior to correction and approval. So now you take away that right of one person to demand that the minutes be read. So these are just three common ones. There are certainly others, and your group may have some particular things in mind. But if you're not going to follow Roberts, you should really adopt a special rule. But follow Roberts for all the other things, but just a special rule that deals with that part of Roberts that you want to do something else. That is the purpose of these special rules of order. When I said parliamentary authority, I refer mostly to Robert's Rules of Order, but there are other parliamentary authorities. This is my array of parliamentary authorities that I have copies of, and certainly by I put it in as much larger than the others, just because as I say, over 90% it's calculated of people, of organizations or societies that in their bylaws set the parliamentary authority. They will set Robert's Rules of Order. And they usually don't identify the number of the edition. You just say the current edition, so that as a new edition comes out, it's automatically covered. But there is the American Institute of Parliamentarians Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure, which used to be called the Sturgis Code, and now is the AIP Standard Code. Probably that's the next most common parliamentary authority. But there's also Demeter's Manual of Parliamentary Law and the Riddick's, Rules of Procedure, and Cannon's Rules of Order. So these are all different. You would have, if you're not going to use Roberts, you might use one of these. And that means that this becomes your primary authority. But generally, I will advise people to use Roberts. For instance, in the AIP, there is no provision for a limit on debate. So at least Roberts says 10 minutes twice. If you want to have a limit on debate, you'd have to put that in your bylaws or in a special rule of order, because otherwise people can talk for as long as they want to talk. So these are much thinner volumes usually, except for, well, I have to say, except clearly for Demeter. But they're pretty hard to get a hold of. For instance, the group of the firefighters that for years and years, their national organization used Atwood's rules for meetings, and they're downright hard to find. So whatever it is, if the organization you're working with has a parliamentary authority in its bylaws, then make sure you have a copy of that available in the meeting somehow, in case the question arises. Or hire a parliamentarian that is well versed in that parliamentary authority. So if you're going to, again, have a parliamentary authority, it's best to put it into your bylaws. This is a sample bylaws provision. So you'd usually have this near the end of the bylaws, somewhere before the material about how to amend the bylaws. And it says, like you would have it like this: the rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall govern the society or organization or association in all cases to which they are applicable, and in which they are not inconsistent with these bylaws or any special rules of order that the society may adopt. So by adopting a parliamentary authority, it's a safety net, as it were, right? Things that you have not put into your bylaws or are not in special rules that you can adopt, then you have an answer for yourself. And so that's why it's wise to have a parliamentary authority provided for in your bylaws. Okay. So standing rules and custom. Standing rules establish administrative detail that do not relate to the conduct of business. So at meetings, commonly applicable to the deliberative assemblies, require only a majority vote to adopt and can be amended by a majority with previous notice or a 2/3 vote. Right? So one of our organizations has in their standing rules that their meetings will be held on the first Tuesday. That has nothing to do with Robert's rules, right? So having a standing rule that that's when your meeting is going to be, then that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. It's very administrative, and it just gives people a sense of, okay, this is when we're going to meet, and we don't have to set a new meeting date at each meeting before we leave. And again, custom, on the other hand, is nothing in writing. That's fine, sort of definition. Established custom should be adhered to unless the assembly votes to do otherwise. However, if a customary practice is in conflict with the parliamentary authority or any written rule, a point of order citing the conflict can be raised and the custom falls to the ground, meaning you don't follow the custom anymore. All right, and this brings us to how the rules are enforced and suspended, which I believe is chapter 11, the last of the chapters that we'll be dealing with and preparing for you to take that quiz. So you see the different topics here: point of order, appeal, suspend the rules, parliamentary authority. All of those are parliamentary inquiry, and all of these first four deal with specific motions. And concluding with what is the role of the parliamentarian. And this material is going to be on, you can see this list on page 90. So I told you earlier you could find pretty easily a chart of motions that may help you with this. This is a chart that is sold. You can get it laminated. It is a laminated chart from the National Association of Parliamentarians. They on that parliamentarians.org, there's a store, a web store, and they have, in addition to being able to buy some of these books, you can also get some useful material here. This one was actually has not been revised yet because so it was based on the 11th edition, but to my knowledge, this would be still accurate because nothing that is referenced in this chart of incidental and bringback motions would be different. And this laminated card on the other side has the subsidiary motions and the ranking motions that I showed you earlier in a previous video. So this might be something handy to carry around with you so that you don't have to memorize what the order is of all of these. But most of the ones we're going to be talking about now are in this last category of incidental motions. And incidental motions become immediately the highest ranking thing to do based on the situation, all right? So, and you see we're going to be looking at point of order, appeal from the decision of the chair, and suspend the rules. Incidental motions, all right? And so the nice thing about a chart is it tells you things like whether it can interrupt, whether it needs a second, whether it's debatable, whether it's amendable, and then is it a majority vote or a 2/3 vote, right? So we'll also look at that last part of the chart, which is may it be reconsidered. So I think we've already looked at the bringback motions to reconsider and to or to rescind and amend something that's been previously adopted. Now, we haven't in this series gone through every one of these because this is about the basics, but I encourage you to study more as time goes by, and sure enough, if the more experience you have, the more you'll see these other things coming into play. Alrighty, let's look at the non-ranking motions, the incidental motions. Incidental motions as a category must be decided immediately before business can proceed. They deal with questions of procedure arising out of another pending motion. So for that reason, we also call them secondary motions. Right? And they do, considering them does not violate the rule about one main motion at a time, because these are secondary in nature. So what is a point of order? I mean, probably if you've ever been to any number of meetings, somebody at one point or another will jump up and shout point of order. What is it? Okay, well, the chair has the duty of making sure that the rules are followed. Right? And that's the job of the chair or the presiding officer. Any member may call the attention of the chair to a violation of the rules. To do so, stand up, you interrupt the chair. You don't have to be recognized, or a speaker if necessary. And without waiting to be recognized, you call out, point of order. Now, first thing I'm going to say about this is this can be abused. Be very careful, because there are some people who, anytime they want to say something, will say point of order in order to be able to insert their opinion, because the chair is obligated to ask them, well, what's the point of order? But the key thing to remember is that by definition, it is dealing with a breach of the rules, right? And it can be a breach of your bylaws or your constitution or any of the rules on that list of rules that we had just gone over. Anyone speaking takes a seat at that point. So it's an interruption, and they're supposed to sit down and wait for the chair to deal with the point of order. And the chair has to say to the member who's called out point of order, the member will state his or her point of order, right? And you then tell how you think the rules are being broken, or and sit down. That's if you're the person who raised that point of order. How have the rules been broken? So if you say something other than that the rule has been broken in the following way, or whatever, our constitution or the special rule is, and you're not getting to an actual broken rule, then it's not truly a point of order, and the chair should inform you of that. It does not require a second. This motion is an incidental motion, but there's no second necessary, and nobody votes on a point of order. So the chair, that's why you see on that chart that we had earlier, C, the chair rules on a point of order. So the chair rules on a point of order by listening to what the person has said and then deciding whether the point is well taken or not well taken. So the chair has an obligation, after the person has tried to explain briefly what rule is being violated, to then either agree or disagree. And the chair does that in a ruling by saying well taken or not well taken, right? And briefly giving reasons in either case. So what I really like is on pages 91, 92, and 93, there is a nice little script about how this all works. And I'd like to sort of go through that with you. First of all, the script shows us and demonstrates a lot of things that we've been talking about all along, particularly in the way motions are made and the way you speak to the chair and the chair speaks to you as a member or another member. So in this script, you see the chair is trying to get a motion adopted that has been made. So we assume that has already happened. And the chair is now at the point of stating the question. The question is on the adoption of the motion, and then the motion is that the tennis league establish a division open to seniors enrolled in city and suburban county high schools. All right. And so, and as soon as he says that, he can either say, is there any debate? Or he can say, are you ready for the question? Right? And when he says, are you ready for the question? Remember what that means? That's basically saying, are you ready to vote now, or do you need to do something such as debate, right? So at this point in the script, member A stands up and asks for recognition by saying the name of the titled officer. In this case, the chair is Madam President, all right? The chair then recognizes the person by saying Mr., we just put A here, but let's say Adams, whatever. Then member A, or Mr. Adams, would say, after being recognized, because they've been recognized by the chair saying that, I move to add comma, whose duties will be used for tennis scholarships. Now that's an amendment, right? See, they don't have to say, I move to amend, by adding. They can just say, I move to add. And it's clear that it is intended as an amendment, the amendment to add. And so at this point, that member who made the amendment just has to stop, sit down when finished. Then it's up to somebody else to second it. But in this script, yes, somebody has seconded it. So the chair is then obligated to state the question, or state the amendment in this case. It is moved and seconded to add, comma, whose dues shall be or will be used for tennis scholarships to the motion that we just saw stated above. So that if the amendment is adopted, the motion will read, and he starts to read the motion by with the additional language. But immediately, member C stands up and interrupts by saying and shouting out, point of order. Right, so that gets you as far as the way it would be used. Obviously, member C has a problem. So what does the chair say? All right, the chair says the member will state her point of order. So we're assuming member C is a is a lady, and therefore the pronoun is correct. The member will state her point of order. It's a man, obviously. The member will state his point of order. Notice it doesn't say, Joe, what's your problem? Right? The member, third person is the best way to use terminology or the titles here. So then member C says, I make the point of order that under our rules, authorizing a new expenditure requires amending the budget. It cannot be done by amending this motion. Once they have basically made their point, you can see this is a very short thing that no debate involved here. The member sits down. And the chair then says, the chair rules that the point of order is well taken. Remember, the chair could have also ruled the other way. It is not well taken. But in this case, when the chair rules either way, the chair is supposed to say something about what the rationale is. A new expenditure does require an amendment of the budget. The amendment proposed to use the dues from students for tennis scholarships is therefore not in order. And then at this point, if that's all that happens, we go back to the motion without the amendment. But under the rules about how you do minutes, you would notice that the ruling is supposed to be included in the minutes. So point of order and the chair's ruling is supposed to be added or included in the minutes of that meeting. Right? So there. Now, let's look at improper motions. Basically, it's that first one, right? It's a motion that the person who is raising the point of order believes is in conflict with their bylaws. It could be corporate charter or constitution or bylaws. But if it's in conflict, then it's an improper motion, and you can raise that point with a point of order. All right. So it could also be a motion that conflicts with a motion that has been adopted by the society and has been neither rescinded nor reconsidered or rejected. Remember, said you can't do that. So a motion, somebody said makes a motion about not buying a car for the executive after that was passed at a previous meeting. Wait a minute, okay, that would conflict with a motion that has been adopted by the society. If you want to do that, it would have to be a motion to rescind, not just word the motion in a way that it is running contrary to a motion that's been adopted. Okay, a motion that presents practically the same question as a motion that's been previously decided at this meeting or at this session would also be out of order. And if the chair doesn't catch this, any member can raise a point of order to bring the chair's attention to that problem, or that conflicts with or presents substantially the same question as one that has been temporarily but not finally disposed of. So if a motion like the one we just saw had been referred to a committee, it's only been temporarily disposed of. So to make another motion that, if you adopt it, would interfere with that motion would also be out of order. Okay, so this is a list of improper motions that you can find in the 12th edition. But the primary one is be careful that you're following your bylaws. Right? And I'm going to move along. And another way that a motion can be considered or construed as improper is if it's dilatory. The term dilatory refers to a motion that seeks to obstruct or thwart the will of the assembly as clearly indicated by the existing parliamentary situation. And under Roberts, a dilatory motion is out of order. Right? So for instance, Any motion or other motion that is absurd in substance is dilatory. Sometimes people will try to amend a motion to take out all the operative language so that what would be left is nonsense. All right, then that would not be that would be out of order, and the point of order could be raised that amendment is dilatory. All right. Robert says a minority of 2 or 3 members could constantly raise points of order and appeal from the chair's decision on them, or repeatedly move to lay motions on the table or offer frivolous amendments. If a member could demand a division on every vote taken when the result was clear, or move to adjourn again and again and again when nothing has happened to justify the renewal of such a motion, business could be brought to a standstill. So these give you some examples of what would be dilatory motions. We said before that if there's a voice vote and it's not really clear because the people who voted no voted louder, and then someone could call for a division to get a rising vote to clarify how that went. But I remember being one of my first meetings, it was a convention, and a vote was taken on a motion, and there was when those in favor say aye, and you could just tell almost the entire assembly voted aye, and when the chair said those opposed, one little thin voice in the back of the crowd says no. And so and then the chair says, well, the ayes have it, the motion is adopted. Division. Well, he looked at me like the chair looked at me as a parliamentarian, and I said, it's dilatory. There's no doubt how that this motion was clearly adopted, and the affirmative voice vote had it. So to call for a division when it's not in doubt in anyone's mind is clearly dilatory. So if it's dilatory, then it is not in order, and the chair can say that, or somebody else could raise a point of order. Key thing to remember here is the chair decides all questions of order subject to appeal. A ruling must be made on all points of order, if it's a real point of order. If now somebody rose to a point of order and asked where the bathrooms are or something, that's not a point of order. All right. Urgent to them maybe, but just because it's urgent doesn't make it a point of order. It has to be directed at a breach of the rules in some way. So if it's not actually a point of order, the chair should just say that's not a point of order, and then it doesn't need to go into the minutes. The chair can make the decision subject to appeal. So, and that's basically the obligation. Or the chair could also submit the question to the assembly. Instead of saying the chair believes that the point is well taken, the chair has the right to say the chair is in doubt. Those who believe this motion is in order, say aye. Those who don't, say no. And at that point, there is no right of appeal because the assembly decided the question. And that's pretty rare, actually, in my actual experience, but that is a possibility. Right? Now, what about appeal? Okay, the group as a whole, not the chair, is the final authority in judging whether the rules have been violated. So if a member disagrees with the ruling of the chair, he or she may appeal it to the group as a whole without waiting to be recognized, similar to the point of order. As we just saw, you can interrupt, you don't have to be recognized. You stand and say, I appeal from the decision of the chair. An appeal does require a second, unlike a point of order. An appeal requires a second. So, and one of the reasons why it's able to interrupt like that is because, and same thing with point of order, is that there are time requirements. You cannot raise an appeal or a point of order, long after the situation would otherwise dictate it. So because it's a timeliness factor for somebody to first make a point of order and then secondly to appeal the decision of the chair, the motion permits that it may interrupt the speaker. So it must be made at the time of the ruling. There we go. Okay, the chair may speak first in the way this is handled. Giving the reasons for the ruling, even if the appeal is undebatable. Right? If it's debatable, some appeals are debatable and some are not, and we'll go into that. I think that's described a little bit here. The chair may speak one last time if it is debatable, and then puts the question in the following manner. That's why I have it a tinted color there. Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Right. So you're not asking if the appeal is to be accepted. You are to, that's a different thing. You ask, shall the decision of the chair be sustained or upheld? Right. Because you're voting on the chair's ruling in that kind of a situation. And it takes a majority or tie vote to sustain the decision of the chair. So usually a tie vote, it's lost. But because this is an appeal, if it's a tie vote, then the appeal is lost and the decision of the chair is sustained. So that's why it should be worded that way. So in the example that you see continuing there on pages 92 and 93, all right, member A stands and says, I appeal from the decision of the chair, and then sits down, right? You don't continue, you wait. Somebody has to second that. And once it's second, member B has fortunately done that for member A. And the chair then says what essentially you see here. The decision of the chair is appealed from, right? So stating what's happening. The chair's ruling was that the amendment proposing to use the dues from students for tennis scholarships is not in order, since under the society's rules, new expenditures may be authorized only by amending the budget. So if that's in their rules, you can see why that was his decision, which may be adopted at the annual meeting. The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Right? And he has to, that's, in this case, he's stating the question. And as the rules permit, the chair will speak first under any special rule of order, unless under our special rules of order to protect the treasury and to make the budgeting process meaningful. The only way to authorize spending money that is not already set forth in the budget is by amending the budget. So that's his debate point so that people will sustain the ruling that he made. And again, he's allowed to speak first. But then, all right, member A rises because apparently member A wants to be recognized. So the chair recognizes Mr. A. This is Mr. Adams again, okay. So, and Mr. Adams or member A says, it is one thing to try to spend money already budgeted on something else. Then it makes sense to amend the budget. Whoops, sorry for my misspelling of the word budget there. Typing fast today. The new student division, however, would bring in money that is over and above that which is in the budget. So we ought to be able to say what it will be used for without amending the budget. And then that person sits down, okay? It's a debatable issue, so the chair gets to speak last, and the chair says first, though, let everybody know. The chair intends to speak in rebuttal, but before he can just start talking, he has to, because he can only speak at the end, he must ask, are there any others who wish to speak first? And pause for a response. Right? And since nobody does in this script, thankfully, because it's already pretty long, the rule seems clear. It states that spending money not authorized by the budget requires an amendment to the budget without making any exception when additional money is raised. The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So after he speaks last, he puts the question to a vote. And that's what he's doing when he says, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Putting the question. Those in favor takes the vote of sustaining the decision, say aye. Okay. And you get some members who will say aye. And the chair then says, those opposed to sustaining the decision, say no. Then you'll have obviously people saying no. In this case, the ayes have it, and the decision of the chair is sustained. The question is now what? Because now we go back, all right? Because that means his decision was that the amendment was not in order. So he just goes back to where he was at the beginning of this script. The question is now on the motion that the tennis league establish a division open to seniors enrolled in city and suburban county high schools. If the group had voted to not to sustain, okay, then he would put the question on the amendment for debate, right? And instead of the motion here. So you just sort of have to remember at all times some of the challenges in a meeting, where we are and what happens next. And understanding what an appeal is and what a point of order is will help you do that. Okay, and now we look at also this motion to suspend the rules. Suspending the rules can be useful. To do something that the rules do not permit is only possible by adopting a motion to suspend the rules. You can't just do it because it would be a point of order and it would be well taken, right? But if you know there's a rule against what you want to do, then you could ask, or you could make a motion to suspend that rule in order to do what you are planning to do, okay? But keep in mind, you can't suspend the bylaws. Only standing rules, special rules of order, or the parliamentary authority may be suspended, but not fundamental principles of parliamentary procedure, or the bylaws, or the charter, or the laws of the land, right? And you see the example here that I have in red at the bottom. Member A says, obtaining the floor, says, I move to suspend the rule to let the member speak for a third time. Again, the rule usually in Roberts, parliamentary authority, is that you can only speak twice, but you want to allow somebody who has something to say an opportunity to speak a third time. This would require suspending the rule, and therefore you would move it in that fashion. I move to suspend the rule to let the member speak for a third time. And then somebody hopefully will second it before you can move along. In moving to suspend the rules, the maker does not name the rule that is to be suspended. Right? You don't have to say, I move to suspend Robert's rules on page such and such. That's not required, or special rule number 6 or whatever. You don't have to name the rule. You just, it should be clear enough as it was worded in that last example. You just describe what it is that you want to be able to do that would violate the rules. For example, I move to suspend the rules to give the speaker 2 more minutes, would be another one. Or I move to suspend the rules which would interfere with taking up the budget at this time, right? And that could be because you have an adopted agenda, right? So, okay. In connection, okay, so that's pretty much covers that topic. We do have another topic here, requests and inquiries that you should know about. In connection with business in a meeting, members may wish to obtain information or to do or have something done that requires permission of the assembly. These are known generally in the category of requests and inquiries, and this is the list of them that's in Robert's Rules. There's a parliamentary inquiry, and there's a request for information. Now, we're going to primarily talk about those because those are the ones that are covered in the 3rd edition. But in the big book, there's also, you can request for permission to withdraw or modify a motion. You could request to read a paper, or you could request for any other privilege. So member A, may interrupt if urgent only. Okay, and sometimes a parliamentary inquiry or request for information is urgent, right? I rise to a parliamentary inquiry. These are sometimes known as interrupting motions, like the point of order and the appeal. The chair responds to inquiries of members. So the person who's supposed to answer this is the chair, the presiding officer. And particularly if it's relating to parliamentary procedure or facts. So this is the 2 that we need to cover, a parliamentary inquiry and a request for information. And hopefully people will not confuse them, but a parliamentary inquiry is a question. It's not a point of order. It's an inquiry about what the rules say. What do the rules provide, right? In order to get information about parliamentary law or rules of the organization. Now, is it in order now to make a new motion? That'd be an inquiry, right? And so, or if it's not to do with parliamentary procedure or the rules of the organization, then it would be perhaps just a request for information. So as you see there, it is a request to the chair So even if you really want to ask some other member or the treasurer, it has to go to the chair or through the chair for information relevant to the business at hand. All right. For instance, I request for information. I rise to a request for information. Do we have enough money in our treasury to afford a new car for the chief executive, which is what the motion is all about? Now, at that point, the chair can answer it if the chair knows the answer, or the chair could refer it to the treasurer or somebody else who is there. Right? But I will say this, in a request for information, somebody may ask a question that nobody has the answer to. There's no requirement to provide an answer to every request for information. But if it's in a motion, if it's dealing with how you're going to vote on a particular question, then the fact that nobody has that information itself may be relevant to how you'll vote. And that'd be the way it is. So if and only if the question requires immediate attention, may it interrupt a speaker to ask, in which case you do not have to be recognized first. Simply state, a parliamentary inquiry, please. And the chair replies, similarly as to a point of order, the member will state the inquiry, right? Instead of beginning by saying, hey, wait a minute, is it right? Can we do this? Is it in order now to move to or refer to a committee? You don't stand up and say that. You introduce it as a parliamentary inquiry, and the chair then is able to ask you, what your inquiry is. So that's the proper way to do it. Okay. Or what is the pending question? I always think that's one of the most legitimate of all parliamentary inquiries, because sometimes because of the way a motion, secondary motion list may be piling up, such as referral to committee, postponing to a certain time, amending, you could easily find a member who is lost. What are we voting on now? And particularly if the chair doesn't make it clear when they put the question, what is being voted on. And so that parliamentary inquiry would be a very good one, and it should interrupt. You don't want to wait till after the vote is taken. All right, and this brings us to the parliamentarian's role. Again, I always like to cover this at the beginning of my classes or even workshops that I do, because people often don't understand that. You pretty much got the idea from things that we went through earlier, particularly on point of order and the like, that the chair, okay, or the presiding officer is the only one who rules when it comes to a point of order. Well, the parliamentarian does not rule, right? And it is a mistake for someone to rise and ask for the parliamentarian to rule on an issue, because that's not the job of the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian would be exceeding their authority to do that, right? And if they're a credentialed parliamentarian, a complaint could be raised with the National Association. The parliamentarian must always make it clear they do not rule unless they are serving as a presiding officer. Okay, it is the duty of the presiding officer to make decisions and rule, but the parliamentarian's role is to advise the presiding officer in responding to points of order, parliamentary inquiries, and generally to provide advice on conducting the meeting according to the rules. The president may appoint a parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian, who, by the way, should be seated right next to the presiding officer, has a role that is purely advisory. Only the chair, not the parliamentarian, can rule on the proper application of the rules. And only on the most involved matters should the presiding officer ask the parliamentarian to give an explanation directly to the group. Okay. So if you are a member and you've been appointed to be parliamentarian, because now you'll probably know more than a lot of people, keep in mind that you surrender a lot of your rights to speak once you're a parliamentarian. Okay, so never forget, right? Parliamentary law should be the servant, not the master of the assembly. We've pretty much reached the end of our series here. And so we point you back to the study guide, the questions 75 through 100 on pages 17 and 20, if you're numbering them, in the study guide is what you can review, which will be based on the 3 chapters that we've just gone through, 9, 10, and 11. And I suggest that you do that to see if you've got a firm enough understanding of the material that's been covered. And when you're finished with reviewing all of those questions and you feel that you understand them well enough that you'll be able to take the membership quiz, then please apply. The membership application is in the same place, posted online at parliamentarians.org under apply and join or join tab, I think. So you can download this application. Now, I will tell you quickly that you'll notice that you have to choose, because actually there is another membership quiz that is based not on Robert's Rules of Order in brief, but on the actual 12th edition of Robert's Rules of Order newly revised. All right. So, and there's a bank in that one of, I think, 300 questions, and you get 100 of them. So it's a 100-question test, right? So it's a little more than what you would get if you take the test on in brief. In brief, the whole set of questions in the bank, okay, will be 100, and they will give you 40 of those that are in those from those practice questions. But make sure when you apply, you indicate which test or which quiz you want to take. All right, so the one on R1R in brief, 40 questions, is what you've been preparing for, so that would be wise to select that. All right, you can now take a paper exam or an online exam. All right, if you choose to take the online exam, you have to pick a monitoring option, somebody in person or some virtual monitor who will be watching and helping you do this. Okay, so and likewise, if you have a paper exam, you would use good chance you will be expected to identify a monitor who will be sent the exam, usually a parliamentarian who's already either credentialed or at least a member of the organization. So and it tells you how to fill out the form, but that's the first thing to understand. It's not automatic that the test will be on in Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, and or involve the questions that you've been preparing for in the study guide, the practice questions. You have to select that, otherwise, you may be selecting a quiz that will be different from what you've studied for. So, okay, there's the general information. Obviously, your first, last name, all of those things are going to be important to fill out. That's what the application looks like. And also on the application, there is a section about choosing a monitor. So if you have somebody who has agreed to give you the test in your local area, then it can be worked out that way. So identify that person, ask them first, and then they'll usually, when you fill out the application, also want to know what date do you want to take the test, right? And that should be worked out with your monitor, right? So, so this information is not the applicant's information. This is about whoever it is that you have been able to find who could serve as a monitor. And then, of course, part of the thing besides taking this quiz would be to submit dues. So they have regular membership dues for the organization, which can be prorated near the end of the year, but also and they have special proration if you are a student and a couple of other things. So you want to read the material that's in the application that I'm just giving you a quick summary of here. There's student memberships, which are reduced from the ordinary membership. But when you pay dues to the National Association of Parliamentarians, you are also obligated to simultaneously pay your state association dues. So whatever state in the United States you may reside in will have, there will be a state association and they will have dues. For instance, in Hawaii, it's $12 a year, prorated to essentially $1 a month if you join mid-year. So that's automatic. You can't just say, well, I only want to be a member of any National Association of Parliamentarians. I don't want to be a member of my state. But on the other hand, those people who live outside of the United States, this is not applicable, the state association dues. So, but anyway, the application is is provided there. Those are the two portions that you make sure you must fill out and submit to the National Association of Parliamentarians. And we hope that some of you will be ready to do this, who have listened to these 4 videos. I believe you're ready easily to take the quiz based on Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief. In any event, I leave you with the parting adage here: keep calm and follow the rules. Thank you for your attention, and best of luck on the membership quiz. I look forward to seeing and hearing from some of you who have become members as a result of these 4 videos, particularly those of you who may not be in the United States. Aloha from Hawaii, and goodbye from the International Services Committee.